Do I know what I'm really talking about? If someone came alongside you on the road and said, "What is it you're talking about?" how would we answer? And what if that curious traveler actually was Jesus? Would it change the answer? The disciples here see no harm in sharing their story with a stranger.
That's Reverend Keat Nakamura Rengers. And today she brings you a message entitled, "What Are You Talking About?" I'm Katie Givens-Keim. Welcome to episode 4230 of Day 1. Welcome to Day 1, the weekly program that brings you outstanding preachers from America's historic Protestant churches, sharing insight and inspiration from God's Word for your life. Hello, friends. I'm your host, Reverend Dr. Katie Givens-Keim, and today on Day 1, we're honored to welcome Reverend Keat Nakamura Rengers, an Episcopal priest, preacher, and storyteller. Katie has served congregations in the Episcopal Diocese of Alabama, and most recently, she planted the Abbey in Birmingham, Alabama, a new church shaped by community, conversation, and faithful risk. From 2019 to 2025, she also served as the presiding bishop's staff officer for church planting, supporting new and renewing communities as they navigated change and discerned fresh possibilities for ministry. Keat Nakamura Rengers, it is so great to have you on Day 1. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Katie. It's good to be talking with you.
I have been so excited to have you on Day 1. I have heard about your ministry and your preaching and just who you are as a person and as a colleague from many of our trusted colleagues we have in common. And you just had a really big thing happen. You came to the end of a chapter of ministry. Would you just talk about that? Just get right into it. Where are you at these days?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I've had a couple of chapters of ministry end over the last few years. In 2015, I planted a church called the Abbey, and we started life together as a coffee shop ministry. And after 4 years, so around end of 2019, we ended up having to close down that incarnation of our community's life together. It has since blossomed into something very different and completely new and equally as beautiful. So that was sort of the end of a story, end of a chapter, and the beginning of a new one. I also had a ministry transition within the last year. From 2020 to 2025, I served on our denominational staff. I was presiding bishop Michael Curry's, that's the Episcopal presiding bishop, staff officer for church planting. So I got to use the experiences that I had had with my own church plant in Birmingham, Alabama, to really support the work of people who were doing new things and starting new communities with new people to support them in that work. And that position came to an end actually about this time last year. So this last year has been, it's been really a time for a reset and discernment about how the Spirit is speaking, and how I can use my story to serve the people of God moving forward.
So Katie, I know on this program and then just in ministry in general, even you could say just in life in general, we focus on the successes and the when things are flourishing, and that's what goes online, and that's what we tell about our lives. And then for those moments in a career or in a life when there's less flourishing, when it's a little more fallow, there's just some shame about it. Like we just don't talk about that. Oh, is she doing okay? When actually they're pretty important moments in life and in ministry. Has that been true for you?
That's been so true. I continually go back to the closing of our coffee shop, which you'll hear a little bit about it in the sermon. It was really a crash and burn kind of experience. It was painful, and maybe more painful than even I describe. And yet I reflect on it as a moment when I learned to not be afraid, of spreadsheets anymore, to not be afraid of, right, afraid of raising money anymore, afraid of failure anymore. Because I think for God, those are often, they're cleansing moments and they're clarifying moments. So what became so clear to me in the death of this vision of this coffee shop ministry is that church has nothing to do really with the structures that we put around it. Institution and structure is helpful and even necessary, but it doesn't define what church is. And so 5 days after we had to make this really painful decision to close this ministry, there were like 50 people who showed up at church that Sunday, not to say goodbye, not to honor the end, but to say, so where are we meeting next week?
Was that frustrating? Were you like, where were you before?
Well, they were there before. I mean, they had always been there, but that was their question wasn't, how are we going to shut this down together? Their question was, okay, well, just give me an address and I will show up there, because they understood something that I hadn't taken to heart yet, which was that the church wasn't the building and the church wasn't the coffee shop structure. They were the church. And so they just knew wherever we show up, we will have church. And it took me a while to fully understand that. And I think COVID was helpful. It was helpful to me, but I think it was helpful to a lot of our churches to just detach from kind of the trimmings and the trappings of what we think church is supposed to be, and I think God was calling us back to what is the essence of 2 or 3 or 25 or 150 being gathered, that the Holy Spirit will be amongst us.
Now listen for God's word as we hear from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 24, verses 13 through 35.
Now, on that same day, 2 of Jesus' disciples were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place here in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" And they replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it's now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are! How slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared! Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. While he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord is risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread.
Now, Reverend Katie Nakamura Rengers' sermon entitled, "What Are You Talking About?"
Two disciples walking together down a dusty road. It's not Peter, not James this time, or John, not even Thaddeus. None of the familiar names of Jesus' inner circle who we know so well. Rather, it's two others from the outer ring, followers, friends, people we've never heard of. The two are deep in conversation, rehashing the events of the last week. A lot of speculating, arguing, probably some cursing, grieving. Do you think Judas really? But where was Peter when? We should have known. Well, I always knew. It's 7 miles from Jerusalem to Emmaus. Plenty of time to take this conversation round and round in circles. Because the truth is, they'll never get anywhere with it. The truth is, they don't know. A stranger increases his stride and catches up to them on the road. He matches their pace, listens in for a little bit, and then finally interrupts. "By the way, what are you two talking about?" To my 21st century ears, maybe to yours, it's kind of a jarring question. Suburban privacy norms and my Bluetooth earbuds that are designed to tune the world out deter my natural curiosity about the conversations of strangers. But I'm also taken aback because I know in my heart that this question isn't just for Cleopas and his unnamed companion. It's a question for me. It's for us. What are we talking about? I'm someone who does a lot of talking. As a priest, you could say I get paid to talk. In fact, even as I'm recording this podcast, this is the week of Ash Wednesday, I'm realizing that this is the 5th sermon I prepared in under a week. How often am I actually able to pause and ask myself, what am I talking about? When I wake my kids up early on Sunday morning to drag them to church, what am I talking about? When I make the occasional social media post about welcoming immigrants, feeding children in Gaza, affordable health care, compassion for people with mental health struggles, what am I talking about? When I sit with a hurting friend, assuring them of God's love, do I know what I'm really talking about? If someone came alongside you on the road and said, "What is it you're talking about?" how would we answer? And what if that curious traveler actually was Jesus? Would it change the answer? The disciples here see no harm in sharing their story with a stranger. There was a man, they say, in whom we had placed a lot of hope, and things were really good for a while. But last Thursday he was arrested, put to death. Our disappointment was crushing. But then, just this morning, we heard something else might have happened. They're passionate in their remembering. They're fuzzy, for sure, on the secondhand details, and they don't know what it all means. I'd like to share a story with you. It's one that I come back to pretty often when I'm asking myself how my own experience connects to the story of Jesus. In other words, what is it I'm always talking about? In 2015, I planted this new church in Birmingham, Alabama. We called it the Abbey. We started as a coffee shop church, quite a business risk, and also in many ways a spiritual risk at the same time. The Abbey was born because we wanted to try something different, a new way of reaching and engaging people with the gospel, especially younger people, younger adults, in a time when even in the Bible Belt, mainline churches are experiencing rapid decline. Hopes were sky high for this new venture, and the pressure was on. I constantly felt the unrelenting weight of expectations from the outside and from within myself to hit all the popular buzzwords, to be innovative, newsworthy, and most of all, successful in our mission. And for 4 years, you could have said that it was all these things. In fact, it was beautiful. We met people in that coffee shop who would never set foot in a sanctuary, but who could somehow sit for 3 hours a day in a church cafe, shooting the breeze about Jesus' love, acceptance, and redemption. We caught the Holy Spirit doing her reconciling work in hearts and lives, brought together over the communion of vanilla lattes and holy conversation. Our young baristas started a hospitality ministry, offering a free cup of coffee and welcome to our unhoused neighbors. The diversity of the surrounding streets invited us to ask Jesus' most profound question every day: who is my neighbor? Starting a new church from scratch, we found, is a lot like giving birth. It's messy, it's slow, painful, and very expensive. It's full of anticipation, possibility, and hope. The Abbey, our church, was beautiful, and we were so proud of what we had built together. And then it all fell apart. Our funding ran out. Unstated expectations and benchmarks weren't met. The diocese didn't renew their financial support, and without that support, I lost my job as the priest. Our coffee shop manager, who had been clean and sober for over 5 years, relapsed. As joyful and meaningful as our ministry at the Abbey was, the business couldn't live any longer. We laid off our amazing staff, packed it up, and taped laminated closed signs to all the doors. It was a slow-motion crash and burn I couldn't prevent. The first time I came back to the empty building, it felt like a tomb. The milk steamers and coffee grinders, once signs of hospitality and welcome, had gone silent. The music and chatter of customers was gone. No smell of cookies baking in the oven, just a heavy, echoing quiet. I was angry. Angry at the institution, angry at the ministry, and angry at myself. What are you talking about? Jesus might have asked me then. Failure, shame, the death of something I had loved. And yet, unbeknownst to me, a new story was now brewing. Our church volunteers just kept showing up. Why let a silly thing like a closed coffee shop stop us from loving our neighbors, they said to me. They came every morning. They cooked breakfast for our neighbors. They paid for the food themselves. They brewed the last of our fancy Costa Rican coffee beans and gave it away for free. And then one morning, I met Joseph. Joseph was living in a tent in a nearby park. He was a slight man with gentle eyes, wearing a pair of women's bell-bottom jeans with sequins on the back pockets. Yeah, it's kind of embarrassing, he said, but they fit, so why not? Even sleeping on the street, Joseph insisted on dignity. He washed dishes for us, cleaned the restrooms, brewed endless pots of coffee. He believed in God, he told me, but he wasn't much into church anymore, not since his stepdaughter had died. He didn't say much more about this, and I decided not to ask. But one morning, after breakfast, as I was trying desperately to get some emails answered on my laptop, Joseph sat down from me across the room and started talking. She was 9, he said. It was cystic fibrosis. The doctors at the hospital said she had about a week more to live. They asked if she wanted to stay at the hospital or go home, and she chose to come home. Joseph, whose love language apparently is coffee and food, asked her what she wanted to eat in these last few days. Was there anything in the world she wanted to try? Filet mignon, sushi, a milkshake? Do you know what she said? He asked me. At this, I finally closed my laptop. No. What did she say? She said, "Well, I've always wanted to try marijuana." My eyebrows must have shot up at this, as well as the corners of my mouth, because Joseph smiled. "It's okay. You can laugh. It's funny." So, he said, I baked weed into brownies and zucchini bread and pasta carbonara, and she ate more that week than she had in the last 5 months. And on the 9th day, she passed away. It was peaceful. I, upon having received this story, just sat there for a moment. I had been wallowing in the tomb of a closed coffee shop, and here was a man who had buried a child and still carried with him gentleness, still carried hope, still carried humor. The story felt awfully like a pearl of great price, the one that Jesus is always talking about. And if I had kept my head buried in my laptop, I might have missed it. A few months later, COVID hit. I'd been dreading the day our community at the Abbey would have to leave our coffee shop storefront building. The rent was just too much for us to manage without money coming in from the coffee sales. And yet I knew that the process of moving was going to feel like a second failure, a second death. But with COVID, suddenly no church had a building. There was no long goodbye, no dramatic closing. A few days before the lease ended that summer, our church community gathered to clean the space up together. And we wrote the names of everyone who had passed through those walls in bright sidewalk chalk: employees, neighbors, skeptics, saints. Names written low and high on the outside cement block walls. Names we trusted were also written in the heart of God. Names who would forever be part of our story with God. On Holy Saturday, 2020, I went back to the storefront alone, wearing a full set of liturgical vestments. I built a tiny Easter fire in the back parking lot, and like so many pastors were doing that day, I chanted the Exultet into my phone on a tripod. Rejoice now, heavenly hosts and choirs of angels, and let your trumpets shout salvation. Just as I was finishing up, someone jumped out at me from behind the building. It was someone wearing a full-face Dia de los Muertos mask and holding a hedge trimmer in one hand. My first thought was, well, what a fitting end. I'm about to be martyred by a clown with a hedge trimmer in all my priestly vestments on Holy Saturday. And then they took off their mask. It was my friend Joseph. He'd gotten an apartment, he said. "You guys helped me. I just want to do something nice for you," he explained. Trim the weeds. They've gotten awfully high lately. "But Joseph," I asked, "what is with that mask, buddy?" He gives me a little shrug. "It's COVID." "Right." "What are you talking about?" Jesus asks. "What are you talking about?" I'm talking about the story of a man with a hedge trimmer who showed up for me in one of my most confounded moments, in pain, in gratitude, in love and hope, helping me understand that human failure is not God's failure, showing me that the place I thought was a tomb is actually full of the great cloud of witnesses. Someone who interpreted for me what it means to respond with certainty, the Lord is risen indeed. The last time I saw Joseph, which has now been many years ago, I asked him if it was okay for me to share his story with others, with you. Of course, he replied. If you think it will give them some hope and comfort, share it all you want. Back on the road to Emmaus, our two disciples finally recognized Jesus in the breaking of the bread. It had been Jesus all along who helped them interpret the story that they were part of. The story showing how God ultimately uses human brokenness, persecution, sorrow, disappointment, and grief for good. Explaining how resurrection was always the only possible outcome. That it was never about institutional success, never about triumphant vindication, but about the fulfillment of everything the prophets had ever said about love and creation, brokenness and justice, redemption and life. That what seemed to be the failure and the end of their movement was only the beginning. That they need not be afraid anymore or ever again. Whatever business the two disciples were on in Emmaus, it's completely trivialized by this revelation. They raced the 7 miles back to Jerusalem in the dark, knocking on doors until they find the famous 11 apostles. And there they tell the rest of their story, which is what Jesus asks you and me to do. Tell a story, share a story, bear witness to the hope that is within you, as it says in 1 Peter. We live in a world that needs some hope, a world that trades in isolation and rumors and fear. And so when Jesus sidles up to you on whatever road it is you're walking, and believe me, he will at some point, and asks, "What are you talking about?" Be ready. Be ready to tell him about the things that broke your heart, about the pearl of great price you almost missed. Tell him about the moment hope came back from the dead. And then, listen.
Our preacher today was the Reverend Keat Nakamura Rengers. For a free transcript of her sermon, What Are You Talking About?, you can visit us online at day1.org. I love the way today's sermon highlighted how the disciples are honest about their disappointment and their confusion. I bet all of us can identify with that very human experience. I say, this week, all of us, let's be looking for whoever our version of Joseph with the hedge trimmers might be. The person who's trying to offer kindness to us in the midst of confusion. Or maybe we are the Joseph with the hedge trimmers to someone else. We'd love to hear what you think of Katie's message this week. You can leave us a voicemail anytime at our Atlanta phone number, 404-490-3354. It goes straight to us. Thanks to those of you who've done it already. We actually play back all listener voicemails at our Day One team meetings, and your kind words, your preacher recommendations, your feedback of any kind, it's so helpful for this ministry now in our 82nd year. So that number again, 404-490-3354. Or, of course, you can always email me anytime directly at host@day1.org. Friends, Easter reminds us that God's love keeps reaching outward, and so do we. At Day One, we are not only continuing a legacy of bringing great preaching to the public square, we're bringing it to new listeners in new ways, always evolving our strategies across YouTube and other platforms, reaching people who may never sit in a pew, but who are listening and searching and ready to hear a hopeful word. Your gift makes it possible for someone, maybe someone who wouldn't walk into a church, to press play and hear a word of hope. Support this ministry at dayone.org/donate or by mailing your contribution to Day One 4062 Peachtree Road Northeast, Suite A629, Atlanta, Georgia 30319. Thank you for helping us to continue sharing hope with a world that needs it. Next week on Day One, the Reverend Jim Keat of the Riverside Church of New York City turns to the beginning verses of John 10 and asks us to hear Jesus' words about abundant life with a little more courage and a lot more honesty. This will not be a sermon about floating off somewhere later while muddling through the present as best we can. It is about the life we are living now, the forces that sometimes drain us, and the holy work of resisting all that deals in death. The Reverend Jim Keat, next week on Day One.
Katie, I loved that sermon so very much. Thank you for bringing it to us. I have so many questions, but one of them, so we have the Emmaus story, and Jesus begins with that simple question, what are you talking about? As you were delving into this text, what drew you to that question? What made it feel so personal and obviously searching for you?
Yeah, it's funny. As I was preparing this sermon, you had invited me to preach on this third Sunday of Easter. And it actually made me realize that I've never bonded with this Emmaus story. It's such a big one, and it's such a powerful one. And yet I was, oh, wow, I don't know if I've ever preached on it before. I don't know if I've ever given it two thoughts.
I don't think I have either. I shouldn't admit that. I haven't either, actually. Yeah.
Right. I feel like it's so powerful and meaningful to some people. It just hasn't been to me. And I think it's because there's this whole expanse of time where nothing much is happening. They're walking along, and then of course Jesus joins them, and then you get this, okay, and then he went back to the prophets and the scriptures, and he explained all this stuff. But he doesn't explain
the entire Bible.
Right, he explained to them the entire Bible, but he doesn't explain it. Luke doesn't interpret that explanation to us, so we don't know what it is that Jesus is actually saying. And when I realized that, I just thought, well, that's actually kind of interesting that Luke doesn't bother to tell us what it is that Jesus was explaining. That part's not, it's important, but it's not that important, right? Mm-hmm. What's important is that Jesus joined them on the road. Mm-hmm. And then obviously once they reach Emmaus, joins them for dinner. Mm-hmm. And so I was grasped by not what Jesus was explaining, right? But the question that he asks, what, by the way, what are you guys talking about? Can I join in your conversation? What was that little moment like? And how weirded out would I be, in a good way, I hope, to realize that it was actually Jesus asking me not that question, right? Not a random stranger. Would it change my answer?
Yeah, which is a great question. I just love how it makes us think about what in the world we're talking about and doing, and so focused on minute to minute, and especially in the world right now. And I think that comes up a couple of times, just where we give our attention. And certainly with that beautiful story of the man who lost his daughter. And I bet we all can relate to your moment with the laptop of of course we all would like to think, what? This man is telling us this amazing thing, and you can still, somehow, your laptop's still open. I painfully resonated with that moment.
I had so many of those in this coffee shop.
I bet.
Church. And maybe that's something that the experience was trying to teach me. And it was because I didn't have an office, right? Oh, so there was no place I could just go and close the door and get business and emails done. So I was always sitting at a table with customers and people walking by to say hi and bothering me. And I did some work. Really, around this time last year, I did some work writing down a whole lot of stories from that time period.
Oh, good.
And as I was doing it, I realized how often I was saying that. Oh, I had my head buried in my laptop. Oh, I was trying to read a book. Oh, I was trying to file payroll. I was trying to distribute tips, right? And I almost missed this incredible movement of the Spirit, or this incredible moment of looking Jesus in the face.
Yeah.
And then I think to myself, oh man, how many of those did I miss?
Yeah.
Right. But luckily God's grace is enough that there were enough that ended up being loud enough to catch my attention.
Yes.
I can tell them later.
Yep. And you can tell them later, and God's grace is big enough. It also is true. I think it's not just ministers who are going to resonate with that feeling of contemporary life demanding so much of us from an executive functioning standpoint, not like executive work, but in terms of things that need our attention. All you need is, now this is a little bit of a rant, but all you need is one family member who is battling medical insurance things, or one kid who has a lot going on in third grade, and boom, all your time and attention as if you don't have to be a parent, you don't just a working, functioning adult in 2026, our attention, it's not just that we can't stop scrolling. That's not just it. It's that there's so much demanding our attention.
Yeah, it's the whole thing that they're starting to call the attention economy as well, right? So there are those, family troubles, and my kids' school uses about 7 different apps to try to get my attention about their grades and their after-school activities, and it's awful. But then there's all these companies, right, and that profit off of our attention.
Right.
I remember something my friend and mentor, Tom Brackett, said. We worked together for about, nigh on 7 or 8 years in the church planting office. And I remember him saying, it's so important to me that when someone's speaking, I give them my full attention, especially when they're telling me a story.
Yeah.
Because they've paid a high price for that story.
Yeah.
And I don't always do a great job, right? I mean, I am shopping on Amazon as much as anyone during, these Zoom meetings.
Yes.
When someone is pouring their heart out. I hate to admit it, but I will.
Yep.
But when I can snap back and remember, wow, the person who is speaking to me or to this group has paid a price for the story, for the wisdom, for the Christ is risen that they are bringing back to us. It is worthy of my attention.
Yes. Yes. Beautifully said. How do you think that the Emmaus story can help us reclaim hope, even after moments of failure or moments of burnout, or just in transitions in life?
I'm really convinced that everything has a lifespan. That's how God created us as human beings, with a lifespan. Everything living has a lifespan.
Yep.
And that includes communities, it includes neighborhoods, it includes churches, it includes dreams. None of the churches that Paul was writing to in the first century are still alive. All those communities have lived out their God-given lifespan. And so much of the way that we live our lives, and this is how I was imagining those 2 disciples on the road, right, it's in fogginess.
Yeah.
It's in this sort of fogginess of, the past and regrets, and then the future and the hope and the anxiety that the future brings. And it's in rumors. It's in the stories that other people are telling us, and we're not sure if we should look at those and, in dread or like maybe in hope. Like, do we even dare hope? And yet Jesus is there in the place of the stranger, but then as the host of the dinner. Something else that really struck me in this reading was that he breaks the bread, he blesses it, they recognize him, and then he vanishes.
Yeah. What do you make of that?
It's the way that our lives as followers of Jesus work in this time of resurrection. We don't get to live just sort of perpetually in the sure, tangible. I get to touch the holes in his fingers or in his hands and in his feet. That's not how the risen life of Jesus works. We get these glimmers. And in the sermon, that experience sitting there with Joseph was a glimmer. It's like we get these sparkling moments.
Yep.
And I think the gift is that, maybe if everything sparkled, maybe if Jesus was just with us all the time, like we would take it for granted.
Yeah.
But because he's not, because it's this resurrected life, we get these glimmers, we get these sparkles within the drabness of our everyday, like day-to-day lives. And we can always come back to those sparkles. We'll always remember them.
Yeah.
Because they shimmered.
Yep. So the pearl of great price that Joseph gave you in that story of losing his daughter, only 9 years old, are we to see in that just how quickly things come and go, how much we are to value Jesus while he's with us?
Yeah. A story it's always about the person who's telling it, and it's also about the person who's hearing. And in that moment, I received it as this assurance that my ministry would go on. That I think it was an assurance that the work and the presence of the Holy Spirit was going to go on. That even though we didn't have this vessel of our coffee shop ministry anymore, the greatest loss of that coffee shop vessel was this space where people would come and drink coffee and pour their hearts out to one another.
Yeah.
And even in I'll just call it the tomb of the destruction of that vessel.
Yeah.
Here is Joseph sharing possibly the most powerful story, sharing the most expensive pearl that has ever been shared in that space. And it was a gift just in itself. That story could just stand alone. No questions asked, no coffee shop. It could stand alone.
Yeah.
But as the receiver of it, being in this place of just utter failure and deep disappointment and anger that I was in, it also took on this new assurance that I would go on.
Yeah.
That our community could go on.
Yep.
That the work of God is completely unhindered by the end of one ministry, the end of one church, the end of one dream.
Yes. The disciples are honest about their disappointment and confusion. What can that teach us about how we speak to God in our moments of loss and confusion? Because we certainly all have it.
We do. And I see in churchgoers a feeling of responsibility to cast these moments in a good light.
Yeah.
To express undying and yet not always authentic gratitude.
Yeah.
And I hold that really gently. I don't think it's always, disingenuous or meant to deceive. I think it's a responsibility that we often think that we owe to God, owe to our faith, to our families, right? Right. To always sort of
be grateful
upbeat,
too.
To be grateful. Yeah. And yet Scripture speaks so differently. If you read the book of Job, is very different. The Psalms, my God, why have you forsaken me? Take a very different approach to holding God accountable, to holding a dream accountable, to just acknowledging what's going on the inside. And yes, like eventually most of those Psalms wrap around to, but God, I do know that you're faithful. But I do know you're faithful.
Yeah.
But they take their time in doing it.
Yes.
And I think we can receive from the whole of Scripture, also from this grief in the story of the road to Emmaus that the disciples are feeling, some permission to be really honest.
Yeah.
About ourselves, even in prayer, even in worship.
So that brings us back in the sermon, Jesus's question, what are you talking about? It becomes this kind of spiritual mirror. And if our listeners paused right now and answered honestly, what road conversation do you think many of us are carrying today? And what do you hope Jesus will do with our road conversations as we listen?
I think many of us are carrying road conversations about what's happening in our country, about politics. Some of the pairs on the road are talking about it from a Democrat, progressive point of view, and then some are traveling the same road, talking about it from the more conservative Republican point of view and everything in between. And I think that that's weighing on people's hearts because like those disciples, all they can do is talk about it. There's, I hear people saying, I wish I could do something. I wish I knew what to do. But ultimately, they're not in a position of power or authority or influence to really be able to do anything but talk. I think people are carrying that depth. I think they're trying to lighten the load of some of these conversations about politics and world events and the economy with lighter talk about things that maybe don't ultimately matter, but that brighten our day a little bit. But I think it's heavy.
And then here's the other huge question: like, if Jesus came alongside of us and was saying, "What are you all talking about?" What do you think you would want us to do with the things that we're talking about and not feeling very effective about?
I go back to when they reach Emmaus, they have dinner, and that's where Jesus is revealed in the breaking of bread. So they don't go and start the revolution. They don't go and start witnessing. They don't go and conduct meaningful business. They have dinner with whoever their host is, and they recognize Jesus's presence. I've heard a lot of wise people recently who are advising and saying, if you don't know what to do, if you don't have the influence you wish you had, if you can't make the change, then make the small change. Yeah. Then love your neighbor. Then love the person who lives in the house or the apartment next door to you. Be kind and show love and generosity and mercy to the people who you walk past every day on the street, who you see at the drugstore, who you see at the grocery store, at your children's school, at work. Your neighbor. Make a small difference. I don't always like saying, oh, these small things add up to big things, because I'm not sure that that's exactly how the math works, but I think they set the foundation for how God calls us to just be in relationship with each other and the rest of creation that help make big decisions and big things more possible.
So, Katie, from this gorgeous sermon and from this exploration you have entered into with this Road to Emmaus passage, What can we take into our week? What's one gem we can take into our week?
Close your laptop for a minute. Put your email down. Put your phone down. When you're standing in the grocery store line, as I am wont to do, and you have your phone out, put it back in your pocket. Put it in your purse. Listen in on some strangers' conversation. Pay attention to what the person in line ahead of you is buying, right? Resort back to that childlike curiosity, which is where not only I think we learn to love one another through curiosity, sometimes even in ways that in this day and age might, not be as socially appropriate as they used to be before smartphones.
Yep.
It's also the places where we open ourselves up to the stranger on the road asking us, hey, what are you buying? What are you cooking? What are you making? What are you talking about?
What are you talking about? Katie, you brought us such a fantastic and true and faithful word. And I think we're going to be carrying it with us for a while. And we sure are glad you brought it to us on day one. Thank you so much.
You are welcome. I'm grateful. Thank you for receiving my stories.
You've been listening to Day One, the voice of America's mainline Protestant churches for 80 years, proclaiming God's hope to a hurting and divided world. 80 years is a whole lot of Sundays, and we're grateful to God for every one. Day One is produced by the Alliance for Christian Media. You can visit us anytime at day1.org. Thanks for being with us. I'm Reverend Dr. Katie Givens-Keim. May the grace of God be with you on Day One and every day yet to come.